Hello?
Hi, Shannon.
Yes.
This is Alyssa with the City of Lawrence.
Hey.
Hi.
I'm Ron Gacious. I'm the chair of the city's Affordable Housing Advisory Board. We have 5 members of the advisory board present right now, and we need 7 for a quorum. We have already heard from 2 other of our board members that they're on their way. They're going to be a few minutes late, so we'll just pause till they arrive, and we can convene the meeting. And in the meantime, I remind of all of our board members that you're sitting on hot mics. And
No cursing.
whatever you think is appropriate, I'll support your right to say it.
Thank you.
So, while we're waiting, Ron, can you tell us
And
what
here
the
comes number
process
6 now.
will be?
Hi, Edith. Pardon me? Repeat the question?
Yeah, the process. How will we sort of go forward once we start talking about the various proposals or that kind of thing?
I don't have any idea. This is going to be a group effort. And I've got a couple of things that I'd like to talk about, and I'm comfortable doing that early in the conversation, but I'm not going to impose my priorities on the board.
Do you have a suggestion, Shannon?
Well, no, I just, I didn't participate in the last couple, and so I just wasn't positive about, like, did we talk about all the proposals, and then we start, saying, okay, I feel, like, this is, we all have the scores, and it's all pretty close, so, so I just wasn't sure sort of how we go about, saying, I think we should support this one for X amount or that kind of thing, so.
It's kind of like that. We had
Okay.
the discussion, we talked about this, at any rate, last time we did it, we discussed the proposals, we discussed the matrix, and from there we said, here's what I think, and we just came up with how to attach numbers to the different proposals.
Have you ever watched an amateur rugby match?
Yes, I have, actually.
What are you suggesting? Maybe
Well, there's
south side versus north side?
Well, there's a spot in the game, there's a element in the game that's called a loose ruck.
Yeah.
And the ball's down there someplace and everyone's looking for it.
Yeah, quite the scrum.
Yeah, exactly right. I've got a couple of comments that I think will help launch a discussion for us, Shannon,
Right.
and then And then we'll see how it goes from there.
But since we still don't have a quorum, our meeting is not starting yet.
But we are at 6.
And Monty's email said he was just a little behind, and then Patrick said he would be here at 11:30 at the latest, so. That's where we are with our last two.
Well, let me do this and make some use of the time we have here with some of the other affordable housing board members, because we don't often sit down in subgroups of 3 or 4 or 5 away from these meetings. And what I'd like to talk to you about just briefly is December's meeting. One of the things that I heard from candidates for city commission, kind of a common theme, was that they all support the sales tax for affordable housing. Several of them suggested that maybe we could do more, or we should be more proactive or more directive, or I don't know, it was a common theme, it seemed, that we could somehow be better achieving our goals or utilizing our dollars. They were remarkably short of specifics, which isn't surprising. They were just candidates at the time. But I do think that we should ask ourselves, and I'd like to spend at least part of the December board meeting talking about this, ask ourselves, are there ways that we could be or should be more directive in the grant policies to ensure that we're receiving applications that meet needs that after just a couple of years we start to see we're starting to fall further behind on, that type of thing. Monty, how are you?
Sorry for being late.
No problem at all. I'm going to call this meeting of the city's Affordable Housing Advisory Board to order at 5 minutes after 11. I'm Ron Gacious, and I'm the chair. The first order of business is public comment, and I'd like to ask if there are any members of the public that would like to address this board prior to the rest of our agenda. Seeing none, we will continue. Next item is to approve minutes of our October 28th meeting, which have been, you've all been sent a link to. Do I hear any motions regarding the October 28th minutes?
I would move that we accept the minutes as submitted.
Do I have a second? All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion's approved. Agenda item C, receive our monthly financial report.
All right, Danielle Bushcutter. I'll keep it relatively brief. I know you guys have a lot on your agenda today. The one big notable change that I want to make sure that you're aware of is in October, you will see for the first time the first round of applications actually showing up on the expense side of it. Revenues were pretty consistent with prior months with our sales tax proceeds. The other thing that I wanted to note, if you are looking at this on our OpenGov site, is that there was an update over the weekend and it is not accurate. So please disregard that. We have a meeting with them this afternoon to get that resolved, but as it currently stands, this data is accurate. What is on OpenGov is not.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any questions?
Any questions?
We are on pace with what was budgeted and what was projected, so I think
Yeah.
we're still expecting to exceed those revenue estimates slightly.
Any questions? Thank you, Danielle.
All right, you're welcome.
Next item on our agenda is the meat of today's discussion. That is review of our NOFA applications. Edith, you came in, you and Monty came in after we'd been talking to Shannon on the phone about how were we going to proceed. And I told her that the last couple of times we've done this, it's been kind of an informal process where we all looked at each other until somebody spoke up and got us launched. And not wanting to create that awkward space again, let me begin by asking you this question, or proposing this idea. 2 of our 7 projects are federally approved low-income housing tax credit qualified projects. And it's kind of unusual that we would get 2 of these here in Lawrence in 1 year. That doesn't happen very often. What's kind of remarkable about these projects is that they tend to be larger projects. They're not small mom and pop developers that do this. They tend to be folks that are reasonably sophisticated and have seen that this fits not only as a tool they can use, but also as something they want to do. Because there are a lot of hoops you have to run through to do these things. Along the way, these projects have gone through a fairly rigorous selection process at the state where they had to compete for eligibility for these federal tax credits. Now, it's a little bit awkward to have 2 big proposals at the same time when we have only a half year's money available to distribute, maybe even a little less than a half year's money to distribute. But I have to ask myself, if these projects came to us and they weren't federally qualified tax credit projects, if that part of the budget was some private developer's money from in town or out of town, wouldn't we probably jump on a project this big with our Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars and tell them that we want to support these kinds of projects? Aren't these the kind of density infill projects that Plan 24 envisions? Now, I'm not making a pitch for how much we ought to support these projects. I'm just making a pitch that when these kinds of projects come to us that have already met these federal metrics for affordability and gone through a competitive selection process at the state, I think we want to tell developers, when you go through that process and you get qualified and you compete and you win, we want to be part of the team that helps bring you to Lawrence. And I don't know if these folks that have got projects before us now will ever come to Lawrence again with another project, but they're here now, and they're local. And I hear lots of comments in the community about, you know, we don't want out-of-state developers coming in and telling us what kinds of projects we should have in our community. Well, here's a couple of local developers that are bringing us exactly the kinds of projects that our goals tell us are important to us for the next 5 years. And they come already having agreed to meet affordability standards as set by the federal government that we've been talking about complying with all along. And they've already gone through a competitive process. So I'm going to be looking for recommendations today that include some level of funding for those 2 projects, because that's something I look at and I see as a priority for what I think we ought to be doing with this round of funding. Yes, sir.
Kind of sounded like a pitch. And
which
is okay,
yeah.
because,
Sound like a pitch.
because my
yeah.
take on it would have been,
Yeah.
I would have said, I would pitch for those projects in support of what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
As you look at the matrix and how the projects do stack up, and I'm going to speak specifically about the Bethel Estates project, because its cost per bedroom, or cost per bedroom, is among the lowest of any of the projects that we've seen. The affordability for 30 years is a very strong, it's a really strong thing in their favor. They have shown with their diligence that they're serious. They're moving forward with this, and I would like to advocate for some element of funding for that Bethel Estates project, because I think that they have proven that they are meeting all of the hurdles and all of the hoops that we have given them. I think somebody from Bethel Estates has been here at each of the meetings that we've held, whether we were discussing this or not. I think that shows dedication and diligence, I'm pitching. I'm gonna speak in advocacy for that group.
This is Shannon, I would agree with that. Obviously, one of the things that's very important is, just exactly how many and who they serve. I think currently they serve about half of their units with people with Section 8 vouchers, which is a very important thing. The other thing that I was struck by, as going through these, because I agree with Thomas, I think Bethel Estates, and you can see it in the numbers, sort of comes out as the top application. But I was also struck by the need to have things, we've constantly been talking about the spectrum, and so Bethel is rental, but this 2310 Tennessee Flats is home ownership, and I kind of lean towards those two projects being my top two projects because they hit sort of the multiple pieces of the puzzle that we're trying to get at based on our goals.
Other comments? Yes,
I
ma'am.
am 100% in on Bethel. I think they're proven. They have a waiting list. I think they will fill up. I'm just in on them 100%. I am intrigued with 2310 Flats. And I would support them 100% as well. I'm a little concerned that they probably still have some hurdles in the community to jump. I'm gonna get a little pushback on that, but I think that'll be okay. Those would be the top two for me. I'm not quite as far as your pitch was concerned that you started with, a little strong there.
Very strong, yeah.
There wasn't a pitch, don't you remember?
There wasn't a pitch,
The disclaimer
however,
came
that's
at the
right.
start.
I can come on stronger.
I wouldn't want to, I don't want to be swayed so much by the big guy thing and the federal dollars. I wouldn't want that to be the overshadowing reason that I would go that direction, because I wouldn't want to disadvantage the smaller organizations that don't have that.
And I agree with that,
Yeah.
and you won't find me supporting exclusively big
Yeah,
projects,
yeah.
not today or in the future.
Yeah.
We need a mix.
Yes, so,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I think these
yeah.
are,
And my take on your position was not, because of this, but instead, they have done the work to get to, at a different level,
yes.
to gain those.
And I think it's kind of unfortunate and won't happen very often that we happen to have two this size in front of us at the same time. So I may not have said it very well, but it was kind of that, the coincidence of the two of them being here, I hope we can take advantage of
Yeah.
at some level of support. But not to the exclusion, because one of the projects that didn't rank real high, I really like the idea of, let's go do something on the west side with two houses on one lot. And let's demonstrate that it's doable and the west side community will accept it. And so it can open the door to more of those kinds of opportunities. So and that's a single unit project that I like a lot.
I like that too, I just didn't think it was as immediate. I think it was,
May
we're still
not
gonna be
be.
able to do that.
I'll weigh in, I guess.
Monty?
Okay, so my number one pick's Bethel at, I looked at a couple things to kind of put them all in alignment with each other, and that was the number of beds created and the cost per bed. Bethel, 70 beds, $5,700 a bed. I mean, that's about as good as it gets. Other projects, I also like the 2310 project, but you're at 11,750 a bed on that project. So, I mean, it's basically double the cost per bed. I still love the project, and I like what that demonstrates, that we're getting someone in the private sector that's interested in meeting this need and putting together something creative, and we need that. I'm with you. I'd love the reward of both. I don't know how we do that, or if we could, but if I had to pick one, it's Bethel. I think the Habitat for Humanity project's interesting. It's at $7,400 a bed for just the new bedrooms created, plus you get that, whatever piece of that they have in the home repairs, which probably brings that down in a $5,000 a bed range when you look at that. So I think that's an interesting project, if there's a little bit of funding to put that direction.
They're also asking for one of the lowest amounts.
Right, a very low amount, so it could be a fill-in. It could be the,
The Habitat.
and then again, I like the West Side project. I'd like to see that project a little more developed before it came here, is my only concern with that. Not that tenants to homeowners won't do that.
Could you speak up a little bit? I'm having trouble hearing.
Sorry, yeah, I say I also like the tenants to homeowners project, but I'd like to see it a little more developed, and if we had to, you know, they come in next round and they have a lot identified, and it's just a little further down the road, I feel I'd be a really strong advocate of that. So that's kind of where I am. I think the stay-in-place projects, both of them, also have merit, for sure. And, you know, I don't know, I think as I see this, getting units on the ground is one of the strong things we need to really look at. Place a high priority in permanent affordability and getting units on the ground. So I would hope other government agencies would step up and provide some of the supportive services, but that's not our decision to make. But I'd like to see the trust fund dollars in units for the most part. I do realize there is that sector that, you know, there are going to be times when, if we had enough units and we needed grant or needed voucher money and whatever, if we had enough units, then maybe that has a place. But Penn Street's a good project, but for 15 to 30 years affordability and over 10,000 a bed, it just falls a little bit below the other two, in my opinion.
And I want to make sure that's clear that it will be 30 years affordable. Just
30.
It says 15, but it is 30, and I'll make that
30.
change for the commission at the,
Were the permit costs ever sorted out on the Bethel project?
yes, and so actually that's a good segue. If I can just touch briefly on, just some of the outstanding issues that came up. So the permit issue, they were also incorporating the water installation fees, and they're $34,000 per building. So the permit fees were correct. We verified that. Just some other little things. The Lawrence Community Shelter Executive Director is here to answer any questions if we have any for that project. The Penn Street Lofts application, there was a question about awarding for multiple cycles, and we met with the legal staff here, and that is acceptable, and we'll be able to figure that out. There will be some mechanisms that'll have to happen, but we can award for multiple funding cycles. The tenants to homeowners application, they had put in that they wanted an RS10 lot, and we confirmed with them that they would also be looking into an RS7 lot with roughly 10,000 square feet of land. And then just the last thing, so we had our consultant look at the three more complicated projects, the 2310 Flats, the Penn Street Lofts, and the Bethel. And we believe that all three of those projects are feasible. As we mentioned, some of them are in different stages of development, and so there may need to be different mechanisms in those funding agreements, and they'll have to be worked out to make sure that the affordability is met and that the project comes to fruition as proposed. But all three of those projects, we believe, are feasible, and we can make them work if they're chosen.
What are the specifics, first of all, of the dollars which we have in this allotment,
$475,000.
475? And then is there a projection for what our next allotment, so my understanding is that's a year away, is that?
That's how how this board has discussed doing is once a year, and so
Right.
the next one would be maybe this
November.
time or a little earlier next year. Mhm.
And is there a projection of what sales tax revenue or what funds might be available as we go into the next funding round?
I'll let Danielle speak to that.
We have very preliminary kind of budget estimates that we've included in the budget. I can go back and look and do by month and then see through October,
Just
but
approximately.
I would say roughly, we anticipate the sales tax bringing in about $1 million a year. And then the 2020 budget also includes that $300,000 transfer from the general fund. So if we want to use really round numbers, about 1.3 million. But again, we have to be cognizant of when we receive those dollars, so it'd be slightly less if we did it this time
That's
next
fine,
year.
that
But
gives me a
that's the
feeling for the
ballpark.
scale.
Yes.
Between our first funding round, this round, and then where it goes moving forward, and that helps a
Yes.
lot. Thank
Good,
you.
perfect.
Shannon, are you still there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okey doke, we're all being quiet, and I just,
Other comments? Questions? Suggestions?
So let's talk about the parts of the applications where they said, if you have give us partial funding, we can or cannot complete the project.
Okay,
So if I remember correctly, I think Bethel Estates indicated they could complete, let me find my part, I'm not sure about Tennessee, 23 Tennessee. Let me find my notes here. Statement, whoa.
So I have that Bethel stated that partial funding, they will proceed regardless, but they will need to find an additional funding source. Penn
Right.
Street Loft said the project will change if it's not funded. And I don't have the answer for 2310 Flats, if that question was asked. I didn't write that down.
do we have any
Two-
specific proposals?
Well, I'm going to suggest something, and
Mhm.
we can talk about that. I might suggest that we fund Bethel at $350,000, and then talk about what to do with the remaining funding. Their last, I don't know if this is very good logic or not, but their last proposal was 350,000, and they said something changed in their project that caused them to ask for an extra 50,000. Had something to do with grading or a water line or something, I can't remember what it was. Which, you know, they would have incurred regardless of whether our funding cycle changed. So I guess I'm suggesting we fund them at 350, and then that leaves us some money to look at the other programs and talk about.
and I think that one of the biggest challenges that this group has at this point is that it'd be great to be able to fund everybody,
Oh.
but we can't.
We
right?
can't,
I mean, we just,
yeah.
it's impossible. I think what we've done with Penn Street is we've said, please keep coming, because we are very interested in that project. that's something which I think meets really the target of this group, so is important. And I think, I mean, they all have high value. I mean, I think that 2310 project is going to be really interesting as it gets going. I fear that it's a little early in their development for us to say, we're gonna give you full funding for that. And as I was thinking about how do we allocate funds, I was thinking of a similar number to you to fund Bethel Estates. I was actually thinking 325, but 350 makes sense as you lay it out there. I also think that Habitat for Humanity project has a tendency, I mean, there's good bang for the buck with those guys. I'd like to see that funded as well. So I would support your 350 to Bethel. And I would raise you 37,000 for Habitat.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would counter, I would sort of think, I think Bethel came out of that top, and I agree with that 350. And I would suggest that we put the remainder of the funding to the Tennessee Flats. And I am a huge supporter of Habitat, a huge supporter of tenants to homeowners, but they've been in every single round, and we funded them pretty much almost every single round except one, if I recall. And I think one of the things that we should be doing is encouraging things like the 23 Tennessee Flats.
So 2310 is asking us for $235,000. We don't know what a partial funding of that looks like to them at this point, right?
They are here, so if you want, we can ask them, but yes, I don't know.
I'd like to ask them that. You comfortable with that?
Absolutely,
Good.
please, go
Would
right
you
ahead.
address that issue?
Yeah, you want me to?
Mhm.
Please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Katie Hoke with Hokeley and Porchlight Homes and 2310 Flats developer. Partial funding would allow the project to go through, and I think in our proposal and in the follow-up information, we looked at a couple different scenarios for affordability. And with homeownership, of course, you're familiar, it's between 80% and below AMI, and then the number of people that are involved, and then of course if there's tax credits available. So there's other tools we can use to make the project affordable, but we are very committed to providing a minimum of the 5 units that we, now I'm gonna forget. 6 units, I'm sorry. So over 25%, just over 25% of affordable permanent housing, and so partial funding would allow this project to go through.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Other comments?
I like the idea of going with 2310 Flats because Habitat has been funded both times. And Habitat's proposal was for the house and the some renovation. Habitat is going to get money for the house. And the renovation program, I would really like for them to work more with tenants to homeowners for those 2 programs to see how they can work together in the future. So I think these 2 meet different populations, the populations that we are both committed to. So I would support the idea of the additional funding going to 2310 Flats and Bethel.
Ron, do you want to address, I mean, your initial statement had to do with the 2 large-scale projects.
Yes.
And it kind of feels like we're taking Penn and,
Off the list.
not paying attention to the fact that it does meet those criteria that you discussed at the start. How would you see that going forward? Do you?
I agree with all of the great statements made about Bethel, 2310 Tennessee Flats, great projects. I don't understand how you distinguish between them and Penn Street Lofts. What's different about Penn Street Lofts that it's not deserving of support with much of the same targeting for the same constituencies as the other two projects? I don't understand the differentiation.
I'll take a shot at that.
Sure.
One, Bethel intends to address elderly and handicap accessible, which are two of our target things.
Okay?
So I think they have an advantage there with the number of units, those kind of units they're gonna buy. And they're at 5,700 per bed as opposed to 10,000 per bed for dollar. Those are the two reasons. That's how I differentiate it personally.
Okay.
I agree,
Yeah,
Penn's a
I agree
good
with
project, but Bethel has an edge, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So,
I hope
Good.
Penn will come back
Good
next
distinctions.
time when we
Good-
have
good-
money.
Good
When you have
notable
subs-
When we
distinctions,
have more
yeah.
money. I wish we could
Yeah.
fund them both.
and
Yeah.
that was one of my questions about what level of funding will we have should our tax revenues go at approximately what we're.
Expected pace.
Yeah, so how does that affect the larger projects that we've not been able to fund? I mean, how could we potentially expect to look at that a year down the line, right? So I'm gonna ask a specific question which has to do with if we were to fund Bethel at 350 and were to fund 2310, what level would you have that happen? Would you suggest that we just do those two projects? Or what, I mean, how do we cope with the other issues?
Yeah, if you do 350 at Bethel and 100 for 2310 flats, then
You have
you've still got
25.
25,000 left. Which none of you are taking home. You spend it.
Ooh, crickets. So,
I mean, I.
Well, here would be my recommendation.
Remainder to Tennessee Flats, and the reason is
Okay.
because the thing that I like is, one, they're permanent, and two, I am really attracted to we funded a rental solution, and we are funding a pretty large home, owner solution, and so, it just seems like, that's the biggest bang for our buck to me.
Okay.
so does anybody want to speak in support of doing more than two projects? Because I think that, Shannon, that's a really good position that we're speaking about there. I think we have, over our last funding cycle, we supported the community with the habitat and tenants, and we took those dollars and we spread them fairly thin. I like the idea of just doing two projects and using our 475 to do 350 to Bethel Estates and 125,000 to the 2310 project. I would suggest that might satisfy what we're trying to do here.
I can fully support that also. I like the idea of not spreading our dollars so thin that we're helping everybody a little bit. We want projects that make a difference. I think, Monty, you made some good distinctions between the two Light Tech projects. And the cost per bed is something that, that's going to need to be competitive. All of the projects are competing on that cost per bed
Yeah.
process, I think the community expects us to leverage these dollars as efficiently as we can, and trying to keep our investments down per bed, per unit is an important consideration.
I would still like to see the Penn Street Lofts move forward. I think that is a project which has real viability. I think that where their siting is of value, that's essentially our core, city core, which is an important place to do it. I'd love to see the west side development move forward. But I think that at this point, we may be better off saying, don't give up on us, come back when we've got a little bit more money to deal with. But if you'd like, I would make a motion
Very good.
And so I would move that our $475,000 be allocated to the Bethel Estates project in the amount of $350,000 and to the 2310 project in the amount of $125,000.
Do I hear a second?
Second that.
Edith, second. Any further discussion?
So I wouldn't be opposed to this motion at all. My, one, I don't know if it's a strong concern, but it's a thought of 2310 being a little earlier in the process. If they were to discover certain aspects of their project where the numbers changed and their costs increased a little bit, how would that affect them? How would that affect this funding? That's my only concern, but I would still support it, but it's just a question up there.
And my take on it is, like you, I understand the realities of building. Their costs are going to change. I mean, that's just how that works. Their
Right.
costs will change. But that doesn't mean that I would not support having them move
I
forward.
just don't want them to be caught in
A question then for probably Alyssa. The agreement that we would have with them would stipulate this number of units, essentially in exchange for this amount of funding.
I think
With-
that's.
Oh, I believe they all do.
2310,
Yeah,
that would
they're that
Lock
specific.
in what we bought with our dollars.
Mhm.
If that, that gives them the flexibility, as long as they deliver those units to do what they need to do within their project to make that work.
Mhm.
I would think, I think that would help me feel better about your concern
So then you,
that I share.
Is every one of these?
Ask the question again, Shannon.
I said, isn't that in all of these agreements from the city that you basically have to do what you told us you were?
that's correct.
Yes, that's correct. Short answer is yes.
Okay, great.
I think this one is probably just a slightly different, the 2310 is slightly different in that it's mixed income in a different way than the other ones have been. Because Habitat, has been one or two projects, tenants, so
Right.
so yes, agreements say that they have to do what they say they're gonna do.
Wouldn't that
I think that's what they call an agreement.
Yes.
Yes, folks, the chair is going to call the question, and then we can resume this conversation on the contract issue. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Now, back to the contract question.
But
Yes.
I would say if they're fully funded, then they deliver what they agreed to. If they're partially funded, that's open to interpretation as to how that might change their project, and that kind of opens the door again, I think.
Well, I think, there's nothing that prevents any of our applicants that receive funds from us from coming back in future years and saying, my budget blew up because of unforeseen reasons, maybe some of it driven by city staff decisions, hypothetically. And in order to fulfill everyone's expectations, we need another $30,000. I'm not going to tell them now they can't come do that.
Sure.
So, if there are those kinds of issues, unforeseen issues, I don't know that they can readily expect that we will solve all those problems for them, but nothing's going to prevent them from coming to us with that kind of a request. Are people comfortable with that? And that's just my interpretation, and, a majority vote here of the board overrides that any moment if you want to do something different. But I can't see why they would be precluded from coming forward with another request.
I would agree with your assessment. I just wouldn't want that to be the fallback position as an automatic to go back to the board.
Yeah, I wouldn't either, but if something extraordinary were to happen,
Sure.
that they could make a legitimate argue for reconsideration. But I think all of these contracts are very specific as to what the applicant's burdens are and the responsibilities of the city, so.
You want to tell our recent,
Patrick, you just missed
sorry,
the vote. that you probably were listening to the live feed out in the parking lot and making sure, no, we just distributed $475,000 in our recommendations, $350,000 for the Bethel Estates Phase 2 project, and $125,000 for the 23 Tennessee Flats.
After a lot of discussion.
Sorry.
After a lot of good discussion. Okay, next item on our agenda.
New business?
Do we have any new business? Under calendar and future agenda items, earlier today I mentioned briefly that in December I'd like to talk about our process while it's really fresh in our minds. I thought the discussion today was really quite orderly, given that I don't know that anyone had any strong paths in mind other than projects they wanted to identify that they're supportive of. I thought we had 7 outstanding applicants. Every one of those applicants meets in the bullseye one of our 5 goal statements. I do think we are continuing to have some ongoing discussions in our minds about, do we fund repairs? Do we fund services? I'm reminded almost every meeting that the resolution that was approved by the voters specifically mentioned services. So I'm very hesitant to take funding services in the future off the list. And our toolbox gives some prominent amount of attention to maintaining the current housing stock, which we can only do through repair and modification programs. I would like to see, as Edith pointed out, applicants come forward with a coordinated approach. If we've got 2 or 3 different agencies already in existence, each of which have some labor abilities or some abilities to provide materials, it would be, I think, a great project to present to the advisory board for funding to show some new collaboration and some new, more efficient uses of resources as we try to figure out how to address the repair and modification needs. There are, I think, some other funding sources around in the community for some of these programs. I don't have a good feel yet for what role we play in addressing those needs. But they're not outside the scope of our responsibilities, I think.
I would agree.
So in December, I hope we could have more of that kind of conversation about what do we like about our process, how could we improve it, are we leaving some gaps behind in our goals that we want to give attention to. I think all 3 of the city commissioners all 3 of the candidates that were elected to the commission have all expressed strong interest in affordable housing issues. We've all heard from Commissioner Boley in the past. He's been a great supporter of our work. And I know the other 2 incoming commissioners have expressed a lot of interest in affordable housing issues also. And we want to be open to their input as well as our other incumbents.
Yeah, I would,
Yes.
on the repair
Yes, sir?
thing, it might just be that we need to have the different organizations talk to us about how they deliver. Because I talked to Jeremy a little bit after the meeting yesterday, and he said basically projects of this size we do, projects of this next size up we refer to the other group because they're equipped to handle that. So it may not be that they necessarily work together, but maybe how that work gets distributed.
And
So
come
I'd
and
like to
explain it to us.
understand that.
So
Yeah,
we
I think we
can
need to
help-
either understand
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
or see a more comprehensive view, so
Mhm.
we do understand what that picture looks like, would
Mhm.
be helpful.
Mhm.
So maybe we can request that they explain that to us if we're gonna have that discussion.
But, yeah, and in a future meeting, let's arrange to have they and any other stakeholder partners in the community that are working that space.
Right. and the
Come
city
forward and talk to
program,
us
and
about,
where the city program, the
and where they fit right now
CDBG
with their
or whatever
current
it
funding.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably got the acronym wrong, but.
Would you block tomorrow? CPDG.
CBDG, okay. CDBG, okay. But how that fits in with what our not-for-profit organizations are doing and how those three really
Mm-hmm.
work
Mhm.
together
I think that's a great
to
idea.
help us understand, because maybe it makes sense that they're delivered this way and we just don't understand it, or maybe it doesn't.
Well, and, you know, we may want to get independent think in that same group,
Yes,
Mhm.
because
yeah, yeah. Any other suggestions for topics of conversation at future meetings?
I would like to, you know, services is so big. How do we, I mean, that's like anything. How do we know what's in or what's out? I mean, how are we going to say that's within the scope or that isn't? Do we have any guidelines?
I,
Perhaps that's what we need to work on.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's the
I
topic
don't,
for
yeah,
conversation.
yeah, I don't know that we have any guidelines. So if we would like some, I think we get to create those guidelines and say, we will fund services in this narrow here. It's got to be part of, you know, a specific voucher program, or we're only going to do it in combination with something else that we're funded, or whatever those criteria should be. I think that's the kind of discussion we want to have. And then when we say no to applicants that come in with something other than what we've asked for, we can say, you know, here's what we want to fund. Not all services are the same. Here's what we, yeah. I think that's exactly the discussion to have as we move forward. Yep. One other item I'd like you to think about in advance of the December meeting is, I want to say it's been a great privilege to serve as chair of this advisory board. That's a 12-month assignment, and I began in January. So I would ask each of you to ask yourselves if you or one of your friends here at the table would like to serve as chair. Please self-identify yourself at the December meeting, because my plan is at the December meeting, we'll select our chair for 2020.
But you could continue to serve, right?
I would be open to doing that,
Thank you.
but this is,
I'm not self-known.
this is a very rewarding role, but I'm more than willing to share it with whomever would like to come next. And I see several very capable faces around the table, including yours. Just saying. Is there anything else to come before the board at this time? If not, then we're adjourned. Thank you all very much.
That was an efficient meeting.